Opal Denning arrived in Cutter's Bluff, Wyoming on the second Tuesday of March with $41, a carpetbag that had belonged to her mother, and a letter she had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. The man who had written it was named Burl Weston. He ran a cattle operation 12 miles outside of town, and he needed someone who could manage a household, keep records, and help with what he called the general running of things. He had not mentioned that the cattle operation had not turned a real profit in 3 years. He had not mentioned that the 2 ranch hands he'd employed the previous spring had quit by autumn. He had not mentioned that his daughter, who was 9 years old and named Prue, had not spoken more than a handful of words to anyone outside the family since her mother died. The train platform at Cutter's Bluff was 4 boards wide and smelled of coal smoke and frozen mud. Opal stepped off and stood still for a moment, with the wind coming at her sideways, and looked at what the town had to offer, which was not much. A feed store, a dry goods with a hand-lettered sign, a bank building that was the only thing made of brick. She had grown up in eastern Ohio and had lived the last 4 years in Columbus, working as a bookkeeper for a textile wholesaler who had gone bankrupt in January and taken her employment with him. She was 31 years old. She had no remaining family. She had answered the letter in the first week of February because it was the only door she could see that was still open, and she had walked through it without allowing herself to think too carefully about what was on the other side. Burl Weston was not hard to find. He was the largest man on the platform, standing apart from the small cluster of people meeting the train, wearing a coat that had been good once and a hat with a crease in the wrong place. He was not looking at her when she spotted him. He was looking out past the end of the platform at the gray distance of the open country, the way a man looks at something he's used to worrying about. He turned when she was close enough that not turning would have been deliberate. "Miss Denning," he said. She said, "Mr. Weston," and because offering her hand felt too formal for the particular strangeness of the situation, she didn't. He looked at her carpetbag. "Is that all you brought? I have a trunk in the cargo car." He nodded and went to get it without ceremony. She stood on the platform and waited and watched him lift the trunk himself rather than asking for help, which told her something about the man, though she wasn't certain yet what. The girl was in the wagon. Opal had not seen her at first because she was sitting very still on the bench with her hands in her lap, wearing a dark coat, a wool hat pulled low. She had her father's broad forehead and her own particular eyes, light brown and watchful, and older than 9 years had any right to make them. "You must be Prue," Opal said. The girl looked at her directly and said nothing. Opal did not repeat herself or fill the silence with something soft. She held the girl's gaze for a moment and then looked out at the road ahead, which seemed to satisfy Prue in some way, because she moved slightly to make room on the bench, and that was as much welcome as Opal was going to get, and she understood it was genuine. The ride to the ranch took the better part of an hour. Burl drove, and the country opened up around them, wide and pale, and carrying the particular kind of cold that felt less like weather and more like a position the land had decided to hold permanently. Opal watched it and did not allow herself to feel small, which took some effort. "We run about 300 head, Burl said, about 20 minutes in. He spoke like a man who had prepared something to say and was delivering it. Mostly Hereford. Good grass in summer, hard winter feed costs. I got a buyer in Cheyenne I've been selling to going on 6 years. She asked the name of the buyer. He told her. Aldous Crane. She had worked long enough with commodity accounts to recognize what questions were worth asking. What price per head have you been receiving? He glanced at her, varied. What did he pay last fall? Burl said a number. She stored it and said nothing else. She would need to see the books before the number meant anything, but the hesitation before he answered was a number of its own. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and it was not what she had hoped. The main house was solidly built, but the paint had given up years ago, and one of the outbuildings leaned at an angle that suggested it was only remaining upright out of stubbornness. The barn was the best-kept structure on the property, which told her what Burl Weston considered worth caring for first. Beyond the fence line, the cattle were moving slowly across winter grass, thick-shouldered and deliberate, healthy enough to look at. "It needs work," she said. Burl said, "I know it." She said, "Most things worth keeping do." She wasn't being generous. She was being accurate. There was a difference, and she was careful about it. Her room was off the back hallway, small with a window that looked toward the barn, and a chest of drawers with one handle missing. There was a quilt on the bed that was clean and carefully folded, and she thought it probable that Prue had put it there, which she noted without mentioning. She spent the afternoon learning the kitchen, where things were kept, what was running low, what the stove required to behave. She found the household accounts in a wooden box on the shelf above the desk in the back room, tucked behind a seed catalog and a folded paper that turned out to be a letter from Burl's brother in Nebraska that had been read many times. She put the letter back where she found it and took the accounts to the kitchen table. She did not look at them that evening. She made dinner, a simple thing with dried beans and salt pork and the last of the root vegetables in the cellar, and she had it on the table when Burl came in from the evening check, and she had the kitchen warm, and she thought she saw him register this, the particular way a person registers a thing they had stopped expecting. They ate mostly in silence. Prue ate with her spine straight, and her eyes on her bowl, and her bread torn into small pieces before she ate it. She drank all of her water and said nothing to either of them. But when Opal stood to clear the dishes, the girl stood too and carried her own bowl to the basin without being asked. And that felt like the beginning of something, though Opal was careful not to make it mean more than it was yet. That night, after Prue was in bed and the kitchen was quiet, Opal sat at the table with the household accounts and a lamp and went through them methodically. The numbers told a story that was not complicated. What came in was less than what went out, had been less for 2.5 years, and the gap had been closed by selling off parcels of the North Pasture, which Burl had not mentioned, and which explained the particular tightness around his eyes when he looked at the range. She went through the cattle sale records slowly. The prices Aldous Crane had been paying did not match what she knew the Cheyenne market bore. She had processed cattle commodity accounts for a full year before the textile company. The numbers in front of her were 12 to 15% below where they should have been, year over year, adjusting for market variation. She closed the accounts and sat for a while with the lamp burning low. The wind pushed at the windows in the particular way of Wyoming in March, insistent and without apology. She did not feel angry yet. Anger was not useful until she had more information. What she felt was the specific sharpness of a woman who has just seen a problem clearly for the first time and understood its shape. She wrote in her notebook, Crane, confirm market rate against agricultural exchange records. Find alternative buyers before any conversation. Then she banked the stove and went to bed. She asked Burl the next morning if she could ride out with him to look at the herd. He said yes in the same way he'd said yes to most things she'd asked, with an economy of words that she had started to understand was not unfriendliness, but something more like a man who had stopped expecting questions to be worth answering. The cattle were in better condition than the operation's finances suggested. She could see care in it, the way the animals were distributed across the range, the state of the water troughs, the solid repair of the fence lines in critical sections. Burl Weston knew what he was doing with livestock. The crisis was not in the management of the animals, but in what happened to the money after. He pointed out the North Pasture as they rode back. He did it without inflection, just indicating with his chin. Sold that section 2 years ago. Had to. She looked at the fence line where his land ended and someone else's began. How much? 320 acres. At what price? He told her. The price was fair enough for the time, which made it worse in some way, that the loss had been necessary and not itself a cheat. She said, we can get it back. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not dismissal. It was the expression of a man who had made himself stop hoping for specific things because the stopping was the only way to keep functioning. She said, not tomorrow. But it's possible. I need to look at a few more things first. He didn't argue. He just rode. She learned the operation the way she learned most things, from the outside in and the specific before the general. She walked the pasture sections. She counted animals twice, separately. She went through the breeding records, and the purchase receipts, and the equipment ledger. She found the pattern she had suspected in the accounts confirmed in 3 different places. Crane's payments were consistently low, not randomly low, not low in a way that might be explained by bad seasons or legitimate variation. Low in the consistent, directional way that was only possible if someone was deciding what number to write down. She started writing to people. She wrote to the Wyoming Stock Growers Association in Cheyenne, requesting price tables for the past 4 years. She wrote to a cattle broker in Laramie, whose name she found in the back of a livestock journal Burl had kept on the shelf. She wrote to a cooperative buyer who advertised in the same journal. The postmaster in Cutter's Bluff, a narrow man named Dobb, who wore the same vest every day, looked at her correspondence with the careful neutrality of a man who had opinions and had decided to keep them. Correspondence, he said. Business, she said, and held out her hand for the stamps. The town had opinions about her. She understood this without needing anyone to state it directly. The way conversations shifted when she walked into the dry goods. The particular quality of the attention paid to her at the church she attended on her second Sunday, because it seemed the practical thing to do if she intended to be part of this community. 3 previous women had come to the Weston place and left. She'd learned this from Prue, delivered with the same matter-of-fact precision the girl brought to most information. 2 lasted less than a month. The 3rd had made it 6 weeks. "You're the 4th, Prue told her. "I see," Opal said. Prue had been watching her from the doorway of the kitchen. She did this often, appeared in doorways and watched without announcing herself, and Opal had learned not to treat it as intrusion. "The other ones rearranged things," Prue said. "My father didn't like it. I haven't rearranged anything." "I know," Prue said. She paused. "You moved the flour. 1 shelf down so it's in reach without the step stool. Your father is 6'2". He doesn't need the step stool. I'm not 6'2". Prue considered this with the particular gravity she brought to information that was technically correct. Then she said, "That's different from rearranging." Opal agreed that it was. The progress between them came in small, accountable steps. Prue appeared in the kitchen in the mornings before being called. She began asking questions, real ones, practical ones, the kind that came from genuine curiosity rather than testing. She asked how Opal knew that the stew needed more time without tasting it. She asked why the cattle on the herd property 2 miles over looked rougher than their own. She asked on a Thursday evening when Opal was mending a tear in the barn canvas whether Opal had ever lived anywhere that wasn't Ohio. Opal said yes, briefly, a year in Pittsburgh that hadn't agreed with her. "Why not?" Prue asked. "Too many people, not enough sky." The girl looked out the window at the Wyoming dark, where the sky was a different thing entirely from anything Pennsylvania offered. She didn't say anything, but something shifted in her expression that was close to recognition. After that, she started sitting in the kitchen in the evenings while Opal worked, bringing her school books and her drawing things, not requiring conversation, but not absent either. Burl noticed this from the doorway one evening and said nothing. But he came in and sat in the other chair with the harness he'd been mending. And they were 3 people in the same warm room, and it was not nothing. It was in the 4th week that Opal laid the accounts out on the kitchen table and showed them to Burl. She had waited until a Sunday morning when he was less tired and the day stretched ahead without specific demands. She put the records in front of him in order, the sale receipts from Crane, the market price data she'd gotten back from the Stock Growers Association, the letter from the Laramie broker with the comparative figures. She sat across from him and let him look. He was quiet for a long time. "He's been paying you $11 to $12 below market per head," she said, consistently, not in bad years only, in every year. He looked at the Wyoming stock growers' figures. He looked at his own receipts. The math was not complicated. He moved through it slowly, and she did not rush him. 6 years, he said finally. "Yes." He put the papers down and put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. The muscle in his jaw moved once. She recognized the expression. A man doing the specific work of not allowing himself to feel the full size of something because the feeling of it would not be useful at the moment. "I've known Aldous Crane since my father ran this property," he said. His voice was flat the way flat voices got when something was happening underneath. "I know," Opal said. She didn't say anything else. This was his to sit with, and she wasn't going to perform it for him. He looked at her. "Where are you getting these market figures?" "Wyoming Stock Growers Association." She put the letter on top of the receipts. "You can write to them yourself, and I have a letter from a broker in Laramie who I've asked for buying terms." He looked at the broker's letter. "Read it. Read it again. Set it down. What does he offer?" $23 a head on your grade," she said. "Crane paid you 19.5 last fall. Your cattle are in better condition than that price reflects." Burl was quiet again. The kitchen clock counted out about a minute. "How sure are you," he said, "about the condition grade?" "I've been through every animal," she said. Not quickly. She paused. "I'm sure." He pushed back from the table and stood and went to the window and stood looking out at the range where his cattle moved. In the pale winter morning, unhurried, heavy-shouldered, doing what they had always done, regardless of what men decided about their value. "When does Crane come through?" she asked. "He always shows up in April, first or second week. Before I moved to Spring Range," she said. "Then we have 5 or 6 weeks." He turned from the window. "To do what? To have everything ready so you're not walking into that conversation with nothing but his goodwill to stand on." He looked at her for a moment, and she held the look because looking away would have been wrong. "You've been working on this since you got here," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the voice of a man updating his accounting of a situation. "I've been trying to understand how the operation works," she said. "That's what you asked for when you wrote to me." He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I didn't ask for this specifically." "No," she said, "but it was here." Burl spent 2 days thinking about it, which was visible in the way he moved through the ranch during those 2 days, quieter than his usual quiet, which was already considerable. Prue noticed. She appeared at Opal's elbow on the second morning, while Opal was tallying feed receipts, and said, without preamble, "Papa's carrying something." "He is," Opal said. "Is it about money?" "Partly." Prue turned her pencil over in her hand, a habit she had when she was working through something. "Is it bad?" "It's difficult," Opal said. "Bad and difficult aren't the same." Prue accepted this without argument. She had the quality, rare in anyone and remarkable in a 9-year-old, of not pushing against a definition once she'd understood it. On the evening of the second day, Burl came in from the barn while Opal was at the desk, making the list of what they'd need for the confrontation with Crane. The comparable sale records organized by year, the stock growers' tables with the relevant columns marked, the broker's letter from Laramie, her own count of the herd with condition notes. She had put it together the way she had put together audit files at the textile company, methodically, with the weak points pre-identified and addressed. He sat down across from her. "I called in at Thurston's," he said. Thurston ran the telegraph office 2 miles south of town. "Frank Tillman over in Rawlins runs 3 times the cattle I do. I asked him what he's been getting from his buyer. $24, he said. 25 in a good season." She said, "And Crane paid you 19.5. He nodded. He was looking at the desk, not at her. His expression had the quality that faces got when a thing that had been vague for years finally took a specific shape. Not surprise, exactly. The shape of something you had suspected but had not let yourself confirm. "I want to be there when you talk to him," she said. He looked at her directly. "Why?" "Because you said yourself that you're not comfortable with that kind of conversation, and because I am." She paused. "Not because I want to run the operation. Because you need someone who has done this before, and I have." He was quiet for long enough that she wasn't certain how he was going to take it. Then he said, "What have you done it for?" "I audited supplier contracts at Hayward Textiles for 2 years, she said. "I found 3 separate suppliers who were billing for materials they hadn't delivered. I documented it, I presented it, and I sat in the room while the owner had the conversation." He looked at her. "What happened to the suppliers?" 2 renegotiated. 1 walked away and didn't come back. He considered this. "Okay," he said. "You'll be there." He stood up and went to the window the way he did when he needed to think where his eyes weren't engaged, looking out at the dark ranch where his cattle were settling for the night. "All those years," he said. "I know. The north pasture would have been enough to keep it. The 320 acres. Yes." He put his hand on the window frame. She could see the deliberate work of keeping his face still, of storing something away to be dealt with in a time and place of his choosing. "We can get it back," she said. "Not all at once. But over time, if the numbers change, it's possible." He looked at her reflection in the dark glass. "You said that before. I meant it before, too." He stayed at the window a moment longer, and then he moved away and said he was going to do the evening check. And she heard his boots on the floor, and the door, and then the cold outside quiet. And she sat at the desk with the files, and looked at what she'd built, and thought about 5 weeks from now, and what Aldous Crane was going to say when he arrived, expecting to write his own numbers in their ledger for the 7th year running. The weeks between had their own particular work. She wrote back to the broker in Laramie, confirming her interest and asking for his terms in writing, which he sent, and she added it to the file. She wrote to a second buyer she found through the stockgrowers' connection, a cooperative purchasing operation out of Fort Collins that was newer, but offered comparable prices with a contract structure that protected against the kind of year-over-year variation Crane had used as cover. She showed both letters to Burl on a Saturday morning over coffee, and he read them carefully and did not speak for a few minutes, and then said, "That's 2 options." "That's 2 options," she confirmed. He looked out at the pasture where the herd was moving in the early light, the familiar heavy shapes of animals he'd known individually by most of their markers. He said, "More to the window than to her. If Crane doesn't deal fair, I want to be able to walk away to something real and not just a threat." "Yes," she said. He nodded once. He picked up his coffee. "That's good work," he said, and it was 2 more words than he generally offered on such matters, and she understood their weight. Prue was growing in small ways that were visible if you knew what you were looking for. She had started helping in the kitchen of her own initiative, not when asked, just appearing with her hands ready. She was talking more, not to strangers, still barely to strangers, but in the house and at the table, and sometimes at the barn fence where she and Opal had developed a habit of standing in the early evening to watch the herd come in. She asked questions that got more complicated the longer Opal was there. She asked about commodity markets. She asked why some fences held longer than others. She asked once, standing at the kitchen window watching Burl bring in the horses, whether Opal thought her father would be all right. Opal looked at the girl, at the particular stillness of her, the way she asked things she actually needed answered rather than things she thought you wanted to hear. "I think he's been carrying a lot by himself for a long time," Opal said, "and that some of it is getting lighter." Prue turned from the window. "Is that because of you?" "It's because of him, mostly," Opal said. "I just gave him different information to work with." Prue was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He talks more at dinner now." "He does. He talked to me about the North Pasture last week. He never talked to me about that before." Opal did not say anything to that. She went back to the accounts she was working on. But she filed it away, the way she filed everything, because the North Pasture was what Burl never mentioned, and the fact that he was mentioning it to Prue meant something about where things stood. Aldous Crane arrived on a Thursday morning in the first week of April. He drove a well-kept wagon with a canvas cover and a team that was better than anything else she'd seen in Cutter's Bluff. He was a compact man somewhere past 60, with a neatly trimmed white mustache and the kind of practiced pleasantness that moved comfortably between genuine and performed without calling attention to the transition. He shook Burl's hand in the yard with the ease of a man exercising a long-established right. "Burl," he said, "good to see you. Aldous." Crane looked at Opal on the porch, assessed her in the way she'd become used to being assessed in Cutter's Bluff. "This your wife?" he asked Burl. "Yes," Burl said. Crane extended a greeting that was technically courteous and contained within it the assumption that she would now find something else to occupy her. She said, "I've been managing the records. I'll be joining the conversation." Something moved through Crane's expression. Not offense yet, something more like recalculation. "Of course," he said. They went to the barn. This was standard. He inspected the herd first, walking the pasture with the unhurried confidence of a man on familiar ground, running his eye over the animals with the practiced speed of someone who had done this many times and already knew what number he was going to write down. "Good-looking cattle," he said. "Your management's improved." He glanced at Opal, which was as close as he came to saying what he meant by that. Burl said, "Opal keeps the records and helps with the assessment." Crane made a sound that was neither agreement nor disagreement. He named his price standing at the pasture fence. $17.50 a head on the base grade, he said. "Market's been soft, but it's a solid season ahead." He said it the way he'd clearly said it many times, with the comfortable certainty of a man who had never had reason to say it twice. Opal opened her notebook. "The market rate for quality Hereford in the Wyoming-Colorado corridor has been between $22 and $24 per head this spring," she said. She said it the way she had practiced, saying it in her head, level without performance, the same voice she had used when she found errors in supplier invoices. "I have the Wyoming Stock Growers Association price tables from February and a contract offer from a cooperative buyer in Fort Collins at $23 guaranteed." She laid both documents on the fence rail between them. "Your herd assessment a moment ago described these cattle as good-looking with improved management. That's a premium grade description." Crane looked at the papers. He didn't pick them up. He looked at Burl. "Burl, markets have overhead you have to account for. Transport, handling, my costs are." There's a column on the right for transport and handling, Opal said. The net gap after those costs is still $4.25 a head. At 300 head, that's $1,275 difference on this season alone. She turned the notebook page to where she had written the 6-year calculation. She had debated whether to bring this out. She had decided it was necessary because without it, Crane could frame this as a single season's disagreement. Over 6 years, at conservative estimates and adjusting for variation, the gap between what you've paid this operation and what the market would have supported is in the range of $6,000 to $7,000. She said it plainly, without anger, because anger was not useful in this room. Crane picked up the stockgrower's table. He studied it. He put it down and picked up the Fort Collins letter. He was taking longer than he needed to, and she knew what that meant. A man reading numbers he's surprised by reads them fast. A man looking for the thing he can argue with reads them slowly. He looked at Burl. A man-to-man look, the kind that assumed the woman beside him was a complication rather than a participant. Burl, he said, we've done business since your father ran this place. I've extended this operation credit in lean years, Burl said. I know that. He kept his voice even. I also know what those years cost me that they didn't have to. He put his finger on the 6-year calculation. Are those numbers wrong, Aldous? Crane's jaw moved. There's variation, he said. Not in one direction every year, Opal said. A variable market moves both ways. The barn was quiet around them, the cattle in the far pens moving in their slow way, indifferent to what men and women decided about their price. Crane looked at Opal with an expression she had seen in other rooms, other conversations, other tables, where she had put documents down in front of someone who had not expected to see them. Not hatred, not exactly. The particular displeasure of a man who has built a practice on other people's inattention and encountered someone who was paying attention. $20, he said, on your grade. 23, Opal said, the same as the cooperative is offering. You're competing with them or you're not. I can't do 23 on every head. Your grade varies. It does, she agreed. She turned to the page in her notebook where she had graded the herd herself, animal by animal. Over 3 separate walkthroughs, 81% of your herd meets premium or high standard grade this season. I have the breakdown by category. $20 on the base grade animals, $23 on premium. That matches what the Fort Collins Cooperative offered with the same grading criteria. She put the page on the rail. He looked at it. He looked at Burl. He looked at Opal again, and this time the assessment was different, not dismissive, wary. The assessment of a man who has understood that he has underestimated what he is dealing with. You'd take everything to Fort Collins, he said. We'd take it somewhere fair, Opal said. We'd prefer to maintain a working relationship, if the terms are honest, but not otherwise. Burl said nothing. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his face carefully still, but she could see something in the set of him that she had not seen before in the weeks she had been here. The particular posture of a man who was not, for the first time in a long time, standing on ground that was tilting under him. Crane was quiet. He looked at the documents one more time, and she saw in his eyes the moment when he stopped looking for an argument and started calculating what he could salvage. 20 and 23, he said. On your grading breakdown. Yes, Opal said. And going forward, Burl said. He said it quietly and steadily, and she had not asked him to say it. It came from him on its own. Crane looked at Burl. Going forward, he said, if the herd stays at this condition. The herd will stay at this condition, Burl said. Crane shook Burl's hand in the yard 2 hours later, after Opal had written out the agreement herself in her careful figures, and both men had signed it. He looked at her once more before he climbed back to his wagon. He did not offer his hand. Your wife, he said to Burl, keeps thorough records. She does, Burl said. Crane drove his match team back toward the road without additional ceremony. Opal stood on the porch and watched him go. Her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. She had been calm in that barn because the situation required it, not because it had cost her nothing. She let herself exhale, fully for the first time since he'd arrived. Burl came to stand beside her. He was looking at the road where Crane's wagon had gone. That number, he said. The 6 years. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I keep thinking about the North Pasture. She said, I know. He looked at her. How long until we can realistically think about buying it back? 2 good seasons with fair prices. Maybe 3 if a year is rough. She paused. It depends on whether the man who bought it is selling. He's not, Burl said. He knew who had bought it. but he'll have a son who'll inherit it. He glanced at her sideways. I can wait. She looked at him. That was the most forward-thinking thing she had heard him say since she arrived. He noticed her noticing it, she could tell. He went back inside. The news moved through Cutter's Bluff over the following weeks, the way news moved in small counties, not announced but present everywhere within days. She didn't know the mechanism. Perhaps Crane had spoken to other ranchers he bought from. Perhaps it was simply the nature of small places, where the air itself seemed to carry changes in situation. What she noticed was the adjustment in how the town looked at her. Dobb at the post office said good morning with something that approached warmth. The woman at the dry goods who had not spoken to her beyond the transactional asked one morning whether she wanted to see the new fabric that had come in, which was an invitation of a kind. A rancher named Whitmore stopped her outside the feed store on a Saturday, with Prue beside her. Heard your spring sale went well, he said. Reasonably, she said. He looked at her for a moment with the measuring look she'd gotten since the first day. Good operation out there, he said. Burl's a good man. Had some hard years. He did, she said. Whitmore nodded once, the weighted nod of a man extending something he didn't offer easily, and went back into the feed store. Prue, walking beside Opal to the wagon, said, He's never said that many words to anyone he doesn't know. Is that unusual? He doesn't talk to women he hasn't known for 10 years, Prue said matter-of-factly. Opal filed that away. A woman named Lottie Greaves, who ran the boarding house at the north end of Main Street, stopped her near the post office the following week. She was a practical-looking woman with direct eyes. My brother runs cattle 40 miles east, she said. He's been selling to Crane for 4 years. I don't suppose you'd be willing to look at his records, Opal said. Tell him to bring them by, any afternoon. Lottie Greaves nodded one decisive nod and went on her way. Prue, who had heard the whole exchange, said nothing until they were at the wagon. Then she said, People are looking at you different now. Opal gathered the reins. I noticed. Is that what you wanted? Opal thought about it honestly, because the question deserved an honest answer. I wanted the operation to be sound, she said. This is what comes from that. Prue climbed up beside her. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the main street of Cutter's Bluff, with its modest storefronts and its wide Wyoming sky above. Then she said, It's better here than it was before you came. She said it plainly, the way she said most things, without decoration. Opal set the horse moving and did not answer, because there wasn't an answer that wouldn't be either insufficient or too much. But she stayed with the words on the drive home, turning them over the way you turn over, something that has more weight than it appeared to on first hearing. The summer came all at once the way Wyoming summers did. The grass went from winter pale to a green so sudden it seemed deliberate. The cattle spread across the pastures with the ease of animals that had been fed well and managed carefully, and Opal stood at the pasture fence on a morning in late June with coffee in both hands and did the accounting she had taken to doing there rather than at the desk. Not the financial kind, which was current and accurate in the notebook. The other kind. The feed debt was cleared. She had addressed it in April, after Crane's payment arrived, faster than she'd expected, which she took to mean he understood the new terms were not negotiable. The payment had been the largest single sum the Weston operation had seen in 4 years. The supplier account at the dry goods was clear. The equipment repairs that had been deferred for 2 seasons had been done. There were reserves, not large, but present, a margin that had not existed in February. Burl was different. Not dramatically different, because he was not a man built for dramatic change, but measurably different in the ways that mattered. He came in from the morning check and talked about what he'd seen, which he hadn't done before, not at the table with anything approaching regularity. He mentioned the north pasture, less with grief, and more with the particular patience of a man who has decided to wait for something instead of mourn it. On an evening in late July, he came in from the barn and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, I had a letter from Clara's father. She had learned about Clara in pieces, the way you learned about things in a house where someone had been lost. Not from Burl, who did not speak of it directly. From Prue, who spoke of it the way children spoke of loss, when they had not been given a different way to carry it. From the photograph in the parlor, a woman with Prue's eyes and a steady, direct posture. She waited. He said he heard things are going better out here. He asked if he could send something for Prue at her birthday. She looked at Burl. He was holding the letter, not reading it, just holding it. Are you going to write back? She asked. I think I have to, he said. He's Prue's grandfather. She looked at him steadily. He was looking at the letter. I was angry at him for a while. After Clara died, he had money and we were struggling and he didn't offer. And I didn't ask, and it just sat there between us like something deliberate when it probably wasn't. Probably wasn't, she said. He exhaled. Two people who both didn't know how to move first. Write to him, she said. Tell him Prue is well. Tell him the operation is doing well. She paused. If he wants to visit, let him. Burl looked at her. You wouldn't mind that. Prue should know her grandfather, she said. That's more important than the thing that sat there. He folded the letter. He was quiet for a moment, working through something, the old weight of the grievance against the new weight of what was possible. He was not a man who did this quickly, but he was a man who did it honestly, and that made the difference. All right, he said. On an afternoon in August, Opal walked to the far pasture and stood at the fence and looked at the herd. 317 animals, counting this season's calves, 12 more than in February. The cattle moved with the easy purpose of animals that were well fed and not anxious. She did the quiet accounting she'd been doing for months and found that what she came up with was different from February's numbers in every direction that mattered. She heard the fence gate, and Prue appeared beside her, slightly out of breath. What are you doing? Prue said. Looking at the herd, Prue leaned on the fence rail and looked too. She had grown taller in the months since February, or Opal had stopped compensating for it and was seeing it clearly. The evening light came in low and turned the grass the color of old gold, and the cattle moved through it unhurried. Are you going to stay? Prue said. She asked it directly, without preamble, the way she asked everything that mattered. Opal looked at the girl, at the careful steadiness of her, the 9 years of managing her own weight without making a show of it. I live here, Opal said. I know, Prue said. She looked out at the pasture. But some people live somewhere, and they're still not sure. I want to know if you're still not sure. The evening was warm, and the cattle grazed in the long light, and somewhere behind them the house sat with its fresh paint, and its sound roof and its kitchen, where 3 people had recently taken to eating dinner without the particular silence of strangers. I'm still not sure, Opal said. Prue turned and looked at her with Prue's eyes, which were Clara's eyes and also entirely her own by now. She studied Opal's face for a moment the way she studied things she needed to be certain about. Okay, she said. She turned back to the fence, and they stood together in the same posture, arms on the top rail, looking at the herd in the August light. After a while, Prue said, There's a calf born this spring that doesn't have a name. She pointed. The red-sided one near the back. I've been watching her. She always goes to the water trough first before the others. What do you want to call her? Opal asked. Prue thought about it with her characteristic seriousness. Penny, she said, for the color. They stood at the fence until the light failed. The calf moved through the herd unhurried, doing what she would always do now, finding her way to the water first, the small habit of an animal that had learned something early and held on to it. That evening, Burl was in the parlor when they came in, which was unusual. He generally came in after Prue was already settled. He had the harness he'd been working on, and the lamp was lit, and there was wood on the fire, though the August evening didn't strictly require it. He looked up when they came in, looked at Prue and then at Opal. Good walk, he said. Prue said, We named the red calf. He said, Penny. She stopped. How did you know? He looked back at his harness. I was watching from the east fence. I saw you pointing. He paused. It's a good name. Prue sat down on the rug with her drawing things. She didn't say anything more, but her shoulders had the settled quality they got when something had gone right that she hadn't known to hope for. Opal sat in the other chair. She opened her notebook to the current accounts and looked at the numbers for the fall projection. The fall sale was 4 months out. She had already confirmed terms with the Fort Collins Cooperative and sent Crane the same terms in writing with no apology. The numbers for the coming season were better than anything the operation had seen in 5 years. She was looking at the fall figures when Burl said, without looking up from the harness, If the fall numbers hold the way it looks, I want to talk about the North Pasture. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on his work. I know you said 2 or 3 good seasons, but I want to start having the conversation with the Dillard family, the son. See where he is on selling. No offer yet. Just conversation. That's a good idea, she said. He looked up at her. The firelight was between them. He held the look for a moment, the way he sometimes did now, briefly and directly. I'd want you at that conversation, he said. When the time comes. She said, I'll be there. He looked back at his work. The fire settled. Prue's pencil moved across her drawing paper, with the focused quiet of a child who has decided the world is stable enough to pay attention to small things. Outside in the pastures, the herd was settling for the night, moving through the August dark toward the water, the way they did, the way they would. She had come here in March with $41 and a soft-folded letter and no remaining doors that were open. She had not come because she was brave. She had come because she was practical, and because practicality, when there is no other option, can look very much like courage from the outside, even when it doesn't feel like it from the inside. What she had found was not what she had expected to find, because she had not let herself expect anything specific beyond the possibility of a foothold. What she found was a man who was honest and capable and had been operating for years on information that was designed to keep him from knowing what he was worth. A child who was keeping herself together through the application of will that would have been impressive in someone 3 times her age. A piece of land and a herd of cattle that were fundamentally sound and had been treated as less than that by someone who profited from the assumption. She had given them different numbers. The rest of it they had done themselves, which was how it always worked when the thing was real. Outside, the cattle settled in the dark. The fire burned low. Prue drew her calf in the middle of the page, slightly larger than accurate, the way you drew the things that mattered, the way you made a record of a time before you knew you were making one. The range held its ground beneath a sky that had gone from hard winter white to the particular deep blue of late summer. And the fence lines were straight, and the north pasture was there beyond the property line as it had always been, waiting for the kind of patience that was not resignation but intention.